this year. I am the Dean, I'm Donna Riley, I'm the Jim and Ellen King Dean of Engineering and Computing here at UNM. And this event is special. It really should be the Dean's plural apostrophe Distinguished Lecture Series, because Dean Alina Kirku from Anderson School of Management is a co-sponsor of this event. So that's super exciting, and I'm glad that we were able to do this event jointly with Anderson, and I hope it's the first of many. And so I am delighted to introduce Doug Campbell, who is our benefactor as well as our host for the evening. So Doug has experience in venture capital and is an alum of the School of Engineering. So I think I'm going to say one braggy thing about UNM, and then I'm going to turn it over to Doug, which is that just recently we have been included again in the National Academy of Inventors top 100 worldwide for utility patent disclosures. So this is an honor that a school of our size does not normally get. So this is a way that we distinguish ourselves, is through the IP that we generate here at UNM. So that's just something to celebrate, and we have been in the top 100 almost every year. I think we missed a year once, but we are a routine generator of a lot of IP, and engineering is a big player in that, along with our medical school and our College of Arts and Sciences and Anderson and so on. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Doug.
Awesome. Thank you, Donna. So first of all, just as a show of how dedicated your moderator and your panelists are, this is actually the second panel that at least Ward and I have been on. And the reason this guy just walked in is we literally just left an event in Santa Fe where we were mostly talking about impact investing and philanthropic investing in the state of New Mexico. And actually Adam was there. He left early. He had an excuse. He had a phone call or something like that. So, and Chris is the only guy that didn't have to drive that far.
I didn't have to go to Santa Fe.
So anyway, so we zipped down to make this work. I want to make I'm going to make a few statements before I ask these guys to give themselves an introduction. I guess real quick, show of hands, who knows what venture capital is? Okay, that's actually a pretty significant majority. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, and I'm sure you've watched Shark Tank, as I like to say, Shark Tank has both made it VC easily consumable, but it's also not reality. And so I don't know about you guys, but anytime I sit through an entrepreneur's pitch and it sounds like they're sitting on a studio for Shark Tank, it bugs the crap out of me. Anyway, but it is accurate to an extent. I mean, basically what it is when you invest in venture, you're generally going relatively early, oftentimes before you have revenue, before you have a minimum viable product. And that's because you're doing something in some, huge market growth potential. You're reading the tea leaves about, what is going to happen. And you think, you're going to have an outsized return on your company. You're going to exit in a really big way. And me as a venture capitalist, I'm going to write you a check in exchange for what's called equity, ownership, essentially in your company. And generally speaking, most companies will do subsequent rounds. And we'll get into a little bit of that, because actually Ward and Adam, they have similarities, but they also have differences. And there's really no such thing as one VC. They each have their own sort of strategic approaches, investment theses, and actually areas of investment. Because as you can imagine, not one VC can cover the entire spectrum of industries. The other thing I want to point out here is that, so when Donna introduced me, so I'm an Albuquerque kid, a couple degrees from School of Engineering, and then I left and spent my career up in the Denver, Boulder area. Had a great career, essentially did tech startups. I have a huge amount of experience in raising venture capital. And in fact, I played all the way through all forms of capital, both things like federal government, venture capital, and then ultimately I took a company public and raised quite a bit of money on Wall Street. And what that afforded me was to really see how incredibly powerful venture-backed startups can be in a community. I think, as most of you who are familiar with New Mexico, you're aware that we have a very strong public sector, but our private sector is not nearly as strong, despite the fact that we have so much R&D that's conducted in the state, federal labs here at UNM, et cetera. And so a lot of my mission, as I'm coming back here to New Mexico, is to help grow that startup ecosystem, because it's a phenomenal engine. Just to put it to numbers, just in 2021, my last year in the saddle of raising venture capital, the state of Colorado collectively pulled in about $6 billion for its startups. And so you can see how incredibly powerful that is. For those of you who are native New Mexicans, this is a really unique point in time. And what I mean by that is every single one of us are now New Mexicans, and every one of us is here to build the ecosystem here in New Mexico. And so we have a panel of active VCs, a gentleman from the state of New Mexico who part of their mission is to invest in emerging funds like this. And then you have a panel moderated by a native New Mexican, someone who grew up in Albuquerque, and someone who, not exactly, but I'm going to go ahead and give myself the definition of a unicorn. So a unicorn, for some reason in the VC world, a unicorn's limited to a private company that achieves $1 billion valuation, which makes zero sense because you have no liquidity. So I achieved a company that went north of $1 billion, and it was public, and I'd argue that's better because you can actually go and liquidate your shares if you want. And so really what you have here is a panel moderated by a unicorn with other New Mexico investors. And this really represents an alternative career path for New Mexicans that really want to swing for the fences and go into venture-backed startups, because it's immensely rewarding, and the economic impact it can just be huge. So again, I just want to make that aware to you guys. So with that, I'd like to ask my panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Mr. Ward.
Thank you, Doug. Everybody hear me okay out there? It's just a real pleasure to be here and to share the stage with you guys. I really feel like it is an incredible moment in time. And I also really love being around students. I've spent a lot of time teaching in my career. I've taught in prisons in California and at UCLA Business School.
Ward, I heard that earlier today. I'm going to ask you about that.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. But the other Anderson Business School is at UCLA, so I've taught there as well. But I moved here almost 5 years ago, and really had no intention of doing much business here. I just didn't know. I came here during COVID. I was an entrepreneur. I took a company from the back of a napkin to a successful exit, not a public exit, but a private market exit. Before that, I was a lawyer for 2 years, and when I was a lawyer, I observed inside of a big law firm some systemic issues with the business model of a law firm, and took those problems and sort of marinated with 2 or 3 other folks, and we started a company called Axiom Law that grew into a disruptive company in legal. And so here I am, and I'm along the way got very interested in climate technology, and really starting from the problem, the existential problem of climate tech. And we'll talk more about that, about how I think about investment thesis and how we're allocating capital here.
Awesome. Adam?
Yes, good to be with you all today. I've been looking forward to this conversation largely because I think UNM plays a really critical role in building breakthrough companies here in New Mexico, and I hope we get to chat a little bit about that today. Our thesis at Roadrunner is that we think that there are pockets in the United States that are overlooked, where they have all the trappings of a place that could build a unicorn, but don't. And we hope to fill some of those gaps, and we'll share why our model is a little distinct in meeting both builders and venture capitalists. We moved here, my wife and I moved here. Yes, we love New Mexico, we love Albuquerque, but we also moved here because we believe New Mexico is having a moment. So I'll make the argument today that we're here because we see immense opportunity, and I hope that you all will leave feeling the same way and find ways to partner, because I think that this is an inflection moment in this state, and I think UNM will be at the center of that movement. Really excited to dig in with you all and share more about what we're building and ways that we can help.
Thanks, Adam. And Chris, you're a bit you're similar, but a little bit different, but a really essential part of the puzzle. So tell us a little bit about you.
So I'm Chris Cassidy. I'm a boomerang like Doug. I left in, I guess, 96 to go to college and lived all over the world, worked all over the world, and moved back in 2017 from Switzerland, actually, where I worked for a large corporation for over a decade. Basically, the State Investment Council is an increasingly important resource for the state. It's $60 billion, which when you think about it in the context of this population of 2 million people is a pretty astonishing figure. That will likely go to over 100 billion in the next decade. As of today, our distributions fund about a fifth of the state budget already. That will grow to roughly a third. And so not only do we play an important role in the long-term fiscal health of the state, and I think eventually we all agree, hard to say the timing, but oil and gas will eventually go away, hopefully, knock on wood. And that's obviously the mission Ward is looking to achieve. But part of our role too is we have a specific program that's dedicated to promote entrepreneurship in New Mexico and tech transfer and commercialization. It's 35 years old and it really kind of hasn't worked that well. And 5 years ago, we felt the need to pretty dramatically change the strategy. We felt we weren't creating enough companies here. Doug mentioned in Colorado, $6 billion a year. I think Colorado's roughly the number 5 ecosystem or number 6 ecosystem. We're in the mid 30s. It's about 150 to 300 million, roughly, 30, 40 startups a year get funding. I think it's subscale relative to the potential. And so some of the investments we've made, particularly in the last couple of years, are to how do we get folks on the ground, like Adam at Roadrunner, like Ward, at the earliest stages to help get companies off the ground and have a higher chance of succeeding. And that's really what the program, and to give you some context, we've committed $800 million in this program since the end of 2022.
So Chris, that was both a little bit of an introduction and a segue into my first question because I wanted to start with you. But I'm going to accuse you of kind of bearing the lead a little bit. And that is that because of the strategy that I applaud at the New Mexico SIC, you guys are the reason why there are now a lot more venture funds walking around here in New Mexico looking for deal flow, looking for companies to invest in. So can you give us a quick, you sort of touched on, you mentioned 60 billion, 100, what is that? Where is that money coming from? What is the state of New Mexico doing with it? And then how does that sort of trickle down into investing into folks like this?
Yeah, it's mostly oil royalties from the Permian Basin. And what's wild about that is like pre-COVID, we were producing as a state down there in the south, like less than 1 million barrels a day. Now we're producing over 2, which is apparently as much as Mexico, if not greater. I think that's in Mexico, the country. So the state has really kind of a unique moment, being lucky enough to be in a state where hydraulic fracking, which was originally a government invention, we're benefiting from that. And so oil and gas royalties are right now funding the state, at least for now. It's a big percentage of the state budget itself, and then the excess flows into our funds.
And what's the overall strategy with the funds? Because venture is a small part of it, private equity is a little bigger part of it, and then there's a ton of other things that are being invested in.
Yeah, so we have our CIO has an asset allocation that's a broad-based set of assets. I invest in private equity, which is some combination of buyout funds, growth equity funds, venture capital, and certain types of special situations. We have a bucket for public equities globally. We have a bucket for different types of fixed income. So we're roughly 15% or the target for us to be 15% in our asset class, hopefully growing to 20%. But we've had such a massive increase in the asset base the last 3 years that we're to give you some context, when I joined 7 years ago, we were committing $200-300 million a year to the asset class. We're now committing $2 to $3 billion a year. It's a pretty staggering change.
And when you say the asset class, are you're lumping private equity and venture
Yes,
is
correct.
lumped into there as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And so can you talk about the state's strategy with that specific pot of investment dollars?
The New Mexico program.
Yep.
Yeah. Where it's evolved to, and this has been an evolution, I've kind of viewed it as a little bit of an entrepreneurial journey myself, where we're iterating, trying to find product market fit. You think about what really good venture capital is, it's a second derivative activity. And what I mean by that is you need to be somebody credible enough that someone like Doug Campbell will sell you part of his business. He thinks there's enough value for him, you to write him a check and you sell him a certain percentage of his company and take a board seat. And as part of that responsibility, technically, the board can fire that CEO. So it's a very it's a relationship of trust. There has to be some mutual respect and value add in addition to the cash. We kind of think about the portfolio and a couple different layers, but I would say the big change that we made is we realized there was a deep, deep need for infrastructure capabilities and capital at the earliest stages in the community. As in, if Luis Chavez of Hydrosonics leaves Los Alamos Labs, where does he go? Where does he go to get the initial capital? Where does he go to iterate on his product for the first, how many years has it been now? We didn't have that. And so what we've done, we've funded Roadrunner Studios, we've funded a group called Antler Global, which is a global accelerator. They have a presence here. It's a different format than a venture studio. It's an accelerator program that's more like a Y Combinator, where founders sell a certain preset percentage of their company. We've just funded a new climate accelerator as well. There was really a deep need for that kind of accelerator studio community here locally. And then combined with that is attempting to have a pretty deliberate sector focus as to what New Mexico has a chance to win at. And we think that's stuff like deep tech, climate tech, aerospace and defense, things where there's evidence of scientific research, there's evidence of existing startup activity, and finding world-class firms that basically ask them to spend time in the community and look for investments here.
Yeah, and for the benefit of the audience, so you use some specific names. So Luis Chavez, he was a scientist at Los Alamos National Lab, and for whatever reason, he got bit by the entrepreneurial bug, and he developed a relationship with Adam Hammer at Roadrunner Venture Studio, and they created a company called Hydrosonics, and that company is currently being funded by Adam at Roadrunner Venture Studio. And Ward.
Yeah, thanks to Adam.
No, I wasn't aware of that.
It's a great example of us two investors partnering on a pretty exciting investment, and we could use that as a case study maybe a little bit later about how we work together and help them find product market fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well let's move on to the venture guys over here. Ward, let's start with you. So Dangerous Ventures, you are both very early stage, which again is a lane for certain aspects of venture capital, and then you're in climate resilient, and this is straight off your website, climate resilience companies in energy, mobility, food systems, and climate adaptation sectors. So further narrowing up, so early stage, climate resilience, why?
Well, we think there's a huge amount of market potential for climate. It's sort of a weird thing to think about one of our most existential challenges also presenting one of the greatest sets of investment opportunities we've ever seen. But that's where we are. And you can look at the explosion of data centers as a great example of how a seemingly disconnected set of technologies and just businesses have created incredible demand pull for a lot of companies we look at. A lot of companies in the renewable energy space, for example. We would probably not be talking about nuclear fusion right now, or small modular nuclear reactors right now as a viable business with potential product market fit pretty soon, if not for data centers. That's just one example of sort of a little bit of an odd pairing, but it's creating a tremendous amount of demand pull for these companies that we look at. So we think about climate technologies and sort of climate change as presenting a handful of opportunities. There are climate change adaptation technologies, resilience technologies, mitigation technologies. We use a lot of words, but really it's how do we use technology in business model innovation to make climate change less bad? I've got 3 kids. I look down, the road of their future, and I really wonder, technology is going to have to play a role if we're going to maintain the same kind of lifestyles and the same environment that we have. That's not the only tool in the toolbox, but it's certainly one of the more important ones. And importantly, it's the kind of tool that we can accelerate pretty quickly. And that's what, Adam and I spend a lot of time looking at companies who have these really exciting technologies, and they have the ability with capital and a lot of luck to de-risk that thing, to find product market fit and find market adoption. And so we like to find companies that have a pretty quick path to market, because we don't have a lot of time to wait around for them to experiment for the next 30 years while the world burns. So we're excited about the market space, and maybe we'll get a little bit later about why we think New Mexico is sort of a great place to do it.
Put a pin in that. I will. I can't help but ask, given the current political landscape, the headwinds in sort of anything clean tech, climate resiliency, how are you adapting? And I heard you already today talking about this. So, a lot of times in our business, we talk a lot about the power of leveraging venture with things like we call it non-dilutive funding. So getting money from principally the federal government in the forms of grants and contracts. That's great stuff because it's non-dilutive. They don't come onto your cap table. They don't take a board position. And it can be quite powerful. But of course, with what's happening, we all watch the news. How are you guys reacting?
Yeah, it's challenging.
I mean, this has to hit close to home.
It does, and it hits close to New Mexico with 2 massive, DOE labs here. And we like to find companies that aren't so reliant on federal dollars or state dollars, government dollars. But, a lot of times the technologies we look at require non-dilutive capital sources to do that really early de-risking, to make it sensible for a private investor like Adam and me to get involved, where if there's just too much risk, it doesn't pencil out for us. And I think it'd be a healthy conversation for us, if we have time today, to talk about risk, different categories of risk and how we think about them. So we like to find companies that can, withstand a market where they don't need to rely on a ton of public government money, but that's not always possible. So we've got to knit together solutions with capital that can help them meet product market fit.
And maybe I'll add one thing, since Ward and I work on a few things together in this space. One of the things that we continue to counsel our founders, in fact, I had a conversation with them this morning, is that it is not enough today to base a company's strategy and product on climate and regulatory regime. It has to make dollars and cents work. So the framing of how we're pushing founders to talk about their businesses is that this has to be a strategic and financial incentive for companies to adopt your product. Not because it's altruistic or good for the world, or you think that fossil fuels is bad, but that, hey, Maersk, if Maersk starts to use biofuels as a component of ship engines, why is it better for their business? Why is it better for their bottom line? It's really important considering what's going on in DC. The other aspect is it's more important than ever, particularly in a place like New Mexico, to think about what are the natural advantages of the state, where you can make a credible argument that says, here in New Mexico, you are advantaged if you're building an in-situ mining company because of a whole set of reasons. We can talk about some of those spikes in New Mexico because I know you want me to put a pin, but both of those things I think Ward and I have been thinking about in the climate and energy space. Dollars and cents, and what are the natural advantages of a geography?
Yeah, and Adam, I'll echo with that. I would argue it's always been true that any investment has to make economic sense, because at the end of the day, the way VC works is these guys go out and raise money from limited partners, so Chris is a limited partner in these funds on behalf of the state of New Mexico, but that's not it. There's private individuals like myself who also cut check to these folks. We're not doing it for altruistic reasons. We're doing it to make a return. So Ward, I'm going to finish up with you. One of the things that also makes you unique is how early stage you get. And for the benefit of the audience, can you define pre-seed and seed? And maybe in the context of the entire sort of venture journey for a typical company?
Yeah, and this will bump up against some of the sort of nomenclature around studios, accelerators, incubators. My firm is a classic early stage venture capital firm. We don't build companies. We wait for those companies to be built or, very early in the stages of being built. We will likely be some of the first capital that a company brings on board after, shaking down their friends and family for some money to get the lights on. But we like to be the first place that early stage founders come. And when I say early stage, it's typically they have an idea. They might have a prototype, an example they can take into the market to get feedback on from real customers. Rarely will they have profits, but sometimes they'll have some revenue. We do some later stage stuff as well. Have not found product market fit, which is real paying customers that can be pointed to as durable over time. And by the way, if I've mentioned terms that are new or confusing, just raise your hand. I'm happy to sort of explain some of this stuff.
Pre-seed and seed.
Pre-seed and seed. So there are milestones of investing, right? And one of the innovations of venture capital over the past 30, 40 years is having very definitive milestones where companies sort of plug into. From an investor standpoint, we are milestone-based investors. We go from, I mentioned earlier, friends and family to pre-seed to seed to Series A, B, C. It could go on. And typically you look for certain things at each of those milestones. At pre-seed, it's an idea, right? At seed, it might be a prototype. At Series A, they're ready to scale. In Series B, it's growth equity to open up 100 offices and turn on the sales engine. So they can bleed, and sometimes the nomenclature gets a little bit confused, but that's generally what we're looking at, our milestones.
And why that strategy for Dangerous?
Well, first off, why that strategy for any venture capitalist? You don't want to give a company $1 million with an idea and say, go at it. You want to have a staged investment that has less risk along the way. And for us, I have two other partners, one in San Francisco, one in LA. We are all former entrepreneurs and operators. So we're comfortable with the stuff in the trenches where you've got to make decisions at strategic decisions at a tactical pace, we like to say. We're comfortable helping build in those early stages because we've done that. So we like to be in the pre-seed seed.
Got it. Adam, so Ward was very upfront. He doesn't create companies. You're a little different. You do. Can you talk a little bit about Roadrunner Venture Studio and the strategy?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So we should start with some premises of what we believe about the world, and then I'm going to talk about why we think building companies and creating them is where we live, and how we partner with folks like Ward as those companies mature. So let's start with a few things. First, my belief about the world is that over the next 5 to 10 years, which frontier technologies, meaning technologies in quantum and AI and advanced materials and synthetic biology, which technologies dominate and where they are built is going to be the defining feature of geopolitics over the next 10 years. That's logic truth number one in my world. The second is R&D, meaning states that spend research and development dollars in basic research is not enough to win in those areas. So you can do a whole lot of R&D in the United States, you can do a whole lot of R&D in the UK, but that is not sufficient. It's a necessary clause, but not a sufficient clause. That my belief of the world, and I think the folks that have partnered with us on this journey at Roadrunner, is that we need both R&D and the conversion of that R&D into companies and into new products to create scale and to dominate markets. So think about what's happening right now in EV vehicles. Part of why, today's Liberation Day, right? Tariff Day. part of what this reaction on tariffs is a fear that Chinese EV is going to beat American EV, right? And we're seeing those concerns around range and battery quality, and Doug can speak at length about this. But there's an article in the Wall Street Journal that ran a couple months ago that interviewed the CEO of Ford. He was frightened. They ordered a bunch of BYD cars to the headquarters of Ford and said, we got to figure out how to do this because the Chinese are beating us. So when I think about the future and where I think about states that will do well over the next 10 years, prosperity is going to be built in the places where they get to a company first, they get to scale first, and they build a better product. So if you take a step back, I think geopolitics is going to be dominated by this competition in frontier tech. Moreover, I think that geopolitics and the future of prosperity for our country is going to be dominated on where are the next billion-dollar unicorn companies built. Will it be in France? Will it be in Brazil? Will it be in China? Will it be in the United States? Moreover, where in the United States will it happen? So what you're seeing is across the United States, states have woken up to the fact, states meaning Mississippi, Maryland, New Mexico, North Dakota, they are on a race to figure out which technology will we be the home for in frontier tech. So Maryland is an all-out sprint to win in quantum. So is Illinois. Indiana is thinking of it being the future of rocket engines. The list goes on and on. But if you want to lead as a state, you're getting really aggressive about thinking which frontier technologies do we want to win in and want to make sure that those companies are born here so that the economy does well here, job growth does well here, the universities do well here, and moreover, it's important to the United States on a geopolitical scale. So if you take those kind of ground truths about the world, what we are doing at Roadrunner is saying, we believe that this country needs a capability to create new companies in areas where we have to win. Most venture capital is dependent on whether there is deal flow to do it, right? The way VC works is you wait for a founder with a great idea. If you're early like Word is, they might just have an idea, but you're a little bit dependent on the precursors. What we're trying to do at Roadrunner is say, we want to build companies intentionally around national priorities and in places where we think there's a natural advantage for that company to be built. So in New Mexico, for instance, we have a couple of theses around areas that we think New Mexico, not for economic development reasons, but for strategic and business reasons, makes sense for a company to be built here and will succeed here because of the natural advantages of the state, the climate, the state government, the R&D institutions, their wonderful universities, and their strong programs. So Roadrunner is a company creation factory, meaning we can start with, it can be a gap in the market that we see. So there is a trend happening in venture capital right now where VC funds want to do more of the build, more of the studio model. So you're seeing 8 VCs created a new build program. Lux has created Lux Labs. Venture funds are trying to add this platform capability that allows them to create a company from scratch based on white space that they see in the market. I spoke with a gentleman named Steve McKee who runs all of the Department of Defense maintenance portfolio. It's a massive portfolio. It's a fascinating job. He's responsible for maintaining the weapons systems of the entire Department of Defense across the world. Met with Steve last week. He's one of the folks who work with very closely at Roadrunner. He calls me and he says, the thing that's keeping me up at night is that in the United States, we are, the amount of traditional forging and casting capabilities is tapering. It's uneconomical for us to do steel and machine work and so on in this country. So the Department of Defense is trying to adopt more additive metal 3D printing. The big issue on metal 3D printing, there's a whole graveyard of 3D printing companies that have not made it in venture capital. One of the problems is that you have to qualify a piece in order to get into a B-52. It has to be qualified, right? It's being made in a 3D printer. How do we know that that critical component of the airplane is just as strong from that 3D printer as it would be out of a forge? Qualification process takes 18 months. He says to me, if we can build a company that can qualify pieces in 6 months using digital twins, using new advanced AI and software, So the moment a component is printed for an F-35, it can be qualified by Lockheed Martin. I'm a buyer. Those types of demand signals is what we get animated about. So what did I spend this week thinking about? How do we build a company using digital twins and manufacturing qualification process where I know there's a buyer and I'm not dependent on a founder or deal flow. I'm going to go figure out which R&D institution in the United States has some interesting technology that might help us tackle this, and where can I find an amazing founder to build it. And so we take those raw components and build companies from the ground up, and then we enlist people like Ward to come along the journey when that company's de-risked insofar that it makes sense for them. I'm rambling a little bit, but that is at a premise how we think about Roadrunner and the venture studio model. I do see a hand up there, but I don't know if we're taking questions.
If it's okay, let's save them till the end.
Okay.
If you don't mind. Thorough as always, Adam. Chris, I've never said this to you, but you're kind of my unsung hero because I don't think a lot of this would be happening if it wasn't for you. And in some regards, I say NMSIC, but in other regards, I say Chris Cassidy. And so to make it very personal, I wouldn't, if not for you, I wouldn't have a place like Road Venture Studio to go over and bug Adam's employees and mooch off of his snacks. I wouldn't have Ward to hang out with and philosophize.
Would not be here.
About clean tech. So, thank you, Chris. You mentioned coming back, so you're a finance guy by background. You were over in Europe, 2016. You came back to New Mexico. Why? Did you come into this role?
Yeah, it's so I was an investment banker, and then I worked at a large corporation in Switzerland. And it's funny. I knew you were going to ask this question, and I think I think there's like a deep. If you grew up here, there's a deep connection to the community that's very unique in this country. It's hard to describe. My father's family was here, and 100 plus years ago. We have a relative who was part of the Constitutional Congress in 1912. I think it's what makes New Mexico a little unique, and I think all of us who love UNM basketball, it's hard to describe the pride, the frustration, I think you have to be New Mexican. I think, long story short, I always wanted to move home. And I bought a house in 2013. It took me 4 years to figure out what to do. And so once I finally found,
you were looking for the right furniture.
I finally found a job at the SIC, and it's been a journey that I wouldn't have expected. And I want to, I learned venture. I'd never been involved in venture. I'd never been involved. I worked at a large corporation which had entrepreneurial elements inside of it, but that's different. So it's been a fascinating journey to learn the industry and try to problem solve and partner with amazing people that, I view my role as like giving a nudge. It's not going to be me personally. I have a blunt instrument through my job in terms of investing capital, and we're trying to find amazing people to partner with that can be co-conspirators, and longer term, those co-conspirators could be people in this room in terms of working at one of the startups, or there's all sorts of roles you can play. But I think as people who grew up here, we're hoping longer term that the opportunities for folks like us who want to return home are more robust, or don't want to leave in the first place.
Chris, earlier you mentioned a shift in the investment strategy roughly 5 years ago. What was that shift?
Try not to be critical of the past. I think programs like these, there's a book called The Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and that should give you a sense of why that book tells you like what it's going to tell you, which is these programs are really hard. There's agency problems, but the tendency tends to be to have a kind of, in my view, myopic focus on writing checks to companies without taking into account the fact that the entrepreneurial journey is very, very difficult, and it's about more than money. And I think that was the focus historically, is writing checks. And my personal view is Shark Tank, while funny and entertaining, is not applicable to the real world in any shape or form, and it's certainly not what was needed here. We didn't need any more people that you show up to and pitch VCs. We need people rolling up their sleeves with founders and working with them. And I think both Adam and Ward would agree with that, based on, this is hard work. This is no joke. And we want founders and companies here to have the best resources humanly possible available to them to increase their odds.
Chris, you mentioned investing in companies in the context of sort of this historical change in NMSIC, because I know today you don't invest in companies, you invest in funds.
Yeah,
was that part of the shift that occurred 5 years ago?
Not 5 years ago, but the program unfortunately does have a past history of writing direct checks into companies.
So just a moment. So for the budding entrepreneurs out there, don't bother going to Chris and pitching to him. He's not going to write you a check.
You come to me and I tell you who to go to. Yes, I do not write checks into companies, but unfortunately in the past, and this predates me by a while, there were direct checks into companies, and it's just not funny to lose $19 million in Eclipse Aviation. My job is to figure out how to support the ecosystem in a way that allows us to earn a financial return at our institution, because we're funding obviously a lot of good causes in the state budget, while at the same time supporting the ecosystem. Because the reality is, as all of you know, a lot of startups don't work, and that's okay. And we need to invest in a way that allows that math to work, where a small number of companies drive the returns of a fund in the asset class generally. And how do you partner with funds that know how to do that work in an intelligent way?
And I appreciate you saying, not all startups work, and that's actually how a venture model works. I know a historical rule of thumb was venture would apply kind of a 10-to-1 model, meaning for every 10 investments, only one succeeds, and the other 9 die, and that one that succeeds is your unicorn and drives all the returns. I don't know if it's quite that harsh in modern times, but certainly in your funds, some of your investments are not going to work out, and that's okay, because it really is, failure in venture is okay.
And some would say, if you're not failing as a venture
you're not pushing
firm,
the envelope.
You're not taking enough risk.
Yeah.
Right.
I say that to my mountain bike buddies all the time.
You're not breaking collarbones,
if
man.
you're not stacking it up on the double, you're not trying.
And it's also true for VC as a market too. Both it's true, startups, power law, right? You get one that makes the fund back. But I often talk to folks about the fact that, look, over the last 25 years, 95% of the realized returns in venture have come from less than 5% of the firms. So it's as true for Ward and me as it is for entrepreneurs, which makes sense because we're tied to that asset class. But both things are hard.
Yeah.
Finding winners and helping build them is challenging. And venture is it's a tough asset class.
Okay, so for my 2 venture capitalists, why New Mexico?
Well, for me, as I said earlier, I was not expecting New Mexico. I was married here 20 years ago. My wife's family is here. And when COVID hit, we decided to come live here for a year back in 2020. And I really just had no expectation either way. I had set up my firm, Dangerous Ventures, and we had activity in California and elsewhere. So I really was expecting to be mostly in those places. And then when I got here, I started looking around and just, remarking about how much cool stuff was going on here. And how little venture activity I was seeing. And started a conversation with Chris and Bruce Brown, who's here on his team. And over the course of a couple of years, really saw an opportunity and started to put some shape to that. And I couldn't be happier here. I mean, I've got 3 kids and my wife, and we're all just thrilled to be here. And I'm from a great place. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, and the Great Smoky Mountains, which has a lot of similarities to Santa Fe, where I live. So it's been hard to pull me away from there. But from a business perspective, we just see a lot of great opportunity, particularly in the energy transition world. We talk about unique assets of New Mexico. You look around in the world of energy specifically, and we've just got a lot of great stuff. We've got a lot of sun, a lot of wind, a lot of geothermal capacity, and a lot of things that we think if we can bring the right technologies to, we can really help the state, bridge ourselves to a future where we're not so reliant on oil and gas. Water is also a very interesting area that we want to spend more time on. It's a hard space to invest in, but I think that's going to change with some of the natural resource overcapacity we have in this state. Have y'all heard of brackish water aquifers? Yeah, it's really fascinating. We've got some of the largest in the country. Varying estimates put it at anywhere from 5 to 10 billion acre feet of brackish water. And to put that into perspective, we consume as a state somewhere in the order of 3 to 4 million acre feet. So if we could somehow take that brackish water and filter it into beneficial uses, we could supply this state for thousands of years and potentially become a net exporter of water. So that's pretty exciting to think about. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Ward. And I appreciate you saying, a lot of the pieces are here. There's a lot of potential. I would say the one area where we have the greatest need, and is a function of why the four of us are sitting in front of you, is we need more entrepreneurs. And that's you guys. And that's why we're doing this. Adam, why New Mexico?
Ward had some great answers, particularly around the natural resources of the state. I'll just add two more that I think are important, critical to our thesis in particular. One is, look, we thought about where to build the first Roadrunner, and one of the things that feels most compelling about this state is a very large PhD per capita, so some very strong research institutions. Yet, opportunity in those research institutions, because the systems are not necessarily created to build companies, right? I mean, Ward and I back a gentleman named Dr. Luis Chavez, who we mentioned earlier. He's the first postdoc in 10 years to leave Los Alamos to create a company. Like the National Lab is not, their mandate from the Department of Energy is not to create companies. It's not their fault. But when we take a systems level
Hopefully we can change that.
Hopefully we can change it, right? For the sake of American security and competitiveness and New Mexico's prosperity, we're trying to change that. Ward's doing a lot at Los Alamos to host roundtables and help put that bug in people's ears. The other thing I'll mention is, look, we're doing something that's crazy. I mean, to think, you're going to building companies is hard. You're going to do it repeatably in a market where it doesn't get a lot of venture attention. This thesis around Roadrunner is totally nuts. So you got to find folks that believe in the mission, and we found that. I mean, it is incredibly hard to find patient capital that looks over the horizon that says that mission needs to happen. And I'm going to bet big on making it happen. That's a critical element of why we're here, is because the state, and in particular Chris and Bruce and his team, they have put the precursors in place for us to take a really big, bold bet here. And boy, are we making a big, bold bet. I mean, personally, in our team, we are fully invested, but it is not without the conditions which have been created in part, largely by the State Investment Council. Which is one of the reasons why I think Ward and me, and I think you, Doug, feel like, look, there's an inflection point happening here in the state.
Awesome. Because I want part of this to be educational, I was going to have both of you do it, but in the interest of time, I'm going to pick on Ward. Ward, can you just give, in the spirit of VC 101, tell me what a venture backable company is, because not all companies are venture backable. So if you guys have an idea for a food truck, don't come talk to these guys. Unless you have an idea to revolutionize the food truck industry, then talk to these guys.
What was that pizza company that started that raised hundreds of millions of dollars? The Astra Pizza, that you could order a pizza and it'd be cooked on the way to your house in the car.
Wow, that's a great idea. We should form a company and do that.
So venture scale. To do a venture scale business, you have to understand what we have to do as venture capitalists. We have to return capital to our limited partners with hopefully a multiple of value. 3x, 4x, 1x, 2x, whatever it is.
Three or 4x.
5. So our job is to find companies that can, from a portfolio standpoint, ladder up to delivering that capital back to our investors. So they have to be companies with a large enough market size and opportunity to become $100 million plus businesses. I'm just putting a real sort of blunt, number out there. But they have to have a revenue potential and a growth potential to carry a portfolio of other investments. We talked about earlier this notion of a power law. Most of those investments are going to fail in a typical venture portfolio. So we have to have, every bet we take needs to have that venture scale potential. The other piece of this that Adam and I think a lot about is venture scale entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who understand the difference between a food truck and a quantum, computing company, and the potential scale of the revenue and the growth there. Venture capital is not an asset that makes sense for companies that don't have that upside potential, because it's very expensive capital. You're giving away a significant part of your company to bring on that capital, and hopefully that capital will have a lot more to it than just cold hard cash. You're going to have people who have built businesses and can introduce you to people. I spend a large part of every day making introductions. If you'd asked me, hey, what's it going to be like in 5 years being a venture capitalist? I would have not thought I'd be introducing people left and right. That's what we do. We're building a network. We're finding subject matter experts. We're finding other investors, more talent. So venture scale is important to be clear on when you approach a potential investor and know how to tell that story.
Appreciate it. Adam, you've touched on this already. Can you touch on the role of federal labs and universities in an ecosystem?
Yeah. In short, I think of them, particularly in frontier technologies, as the engine. If you look at case studies of geographies, ecosystems, cities that have created reliably, time and time again, breakthrough companies, the university plays a critical role in every story. Name me one where it hasn't. I think back to I think it's a 1973 report on what created Silicon Valley, right? This is the old weak ties component, and universities are these meccas where exactly what Ward was saying, they can help instill weak ties, which means information transfer, introducing people, giving folks training, making sure that there are engagements between universities and corporations, but also giving people the platform and kind of the bubble to fail. That's particularly important for university systems. When we look at venture capital, I think about failure as an entrepreneur as a prerequisite. I'd rather have an entrepreneur that's tried and failed than never created something before. That is deeply unpopular, particularly I have found in New Mexico. People are afraid to fail. And what I think Ward and I and Doug and Chris are trying to do is create an environment where it is okay to fail. And hopefully creating partners where we can help de-risk that journey for people.
As long as you learn.
As long as you learn, truly.
And get back up and dust yourself off.
Totally. Yeah. So research labs, universities are the engine for ideas and for developing talent and future founders. There are also places where it teaches folks it's a safe place to fail. And there are places that drive a tremendous amount of connections. Your roommates, your future employers, your alumni, the folks you meet at events, that's the kind of precursors of creating companies.
Thanks, Adam. So I want to give each of you an opportunity to brag, but some ground rules. You can't brag about each other. So Chris, brag about one of your investments. Something that you think serves as a good example for what we're talking about and isn't Roadrunner Venture Studio or Dangerous Ventures.
I'll keep it New Mexico specific. Look, I get excited in this job about creating things that wouldn't exist without the nudge from us. And so,
I love
you know,
that. I love that.
you know, we funded, and it's about to launch. We funded a $20 million. It's called a post accelerator program. A group called Up Partners is going to basically track climate startups that maybe raised a little bit of money and are looking at a place to build for 2 or 3 years to find product market fit. That should be soon. And that one, the responses has been astonishing. It's still in stealth, but companies from, frankly, not all around the country, but all over the world, including local founders, is resonating with. So that's cool, because it's a bet you make. You're not, all these, I like to say to my colleague Bruce, we live in a world of probabilities. You never know for sure if everything's going to work. But that one was off to a very good start. And in terms of a company that I think is just really neat, that's they're technically headquartered somewhere else, but they're doing most of their initial work operationalizing in the southern part of the state, and they're a really amazing startup working on autism treatment, which is, there's a massive shortage. I wouldn't have known this, but it takes 40 hours of treatment a week and there's just like a crazy shortage of people to even diagnose or treat. Nothing, and they're using computer vision and AI to try to speed up the process so that clinicians can be a little more effective and do it in less time. Pretty neat.
Thanks, Chris. Adam? Oh, and it can't be Luis Chavez and Ultrasonics.
Yeah, I'll share the love. I actually think it's another company that we're co-invested in. If you've signed the docs, I think you have. So
you guys are watching deal flow in real time.
Talk about
real time.
These are weak ties right here. Sending the docs over. So there is a company that we're very proud to back called Thunderstone, and what I like about
Signed.
Let's go. What I like about it is, it was 2 founders, one based in Helsinki, one based in Montana, who have an idea that, to Ward's earlier point, is good for the world. It is a in situ mining technique that enables mining extraction at what we think would be 90% more environmentally friendly. It is also, to the point we made earlier, cost effective, dramatically so if their early prototypes bear fruit. They've tested in the lab, now they're testing it out in the field. And what I like about that company is, one, it tackles a national priority. What the promise that I get fired up about is, look, we need critical minerals here in this country, but it has not been cost effective to do so. So when we think about nickel, for instance, Indonesian nickel is kind of the 800-pound gorilla. They have managed to extract nickel at prices that are just uneconomical for the United States to compete on. So there's
for the benefit of the audience, nickel, all your batteries, bunch of
point.
nickel in here, nickel in there.
Yep, a critical mineral, and we have a few nickel mines in the United States, one of which is in Michigan, and it's dormant. Owned by a U.S. company, but completely unoperational because the marginal unit economics don't make sense for them to mine. What I love about this company is they have found a way to go into these dormant mines and re-operationalize them and produce nickel more environmentally friendly than traditional methods, and at unit economics that allow the United States to regain the lead in some of these critical minerals. The second thing I love about it, well, there's 3 things. The second thing I love about it is that the founders moved here. This is a case in point of look, I didn't require them to move here. We didn't tell them, hey, look, we're funded by the State Investment Council and it's really important for us. We made the strategic case that it would be better for their business to be built here than in California. And so the founder moved here 2 weeks ago and is setting up shop here in New Mexico because of a dollars and cents argument. And the third thing I love about it is I'm doing it with Ward, which is another example of how VC works. We find companies, we share the deal flow. He's going to help them in ways that I can't, because Ward comes with a whole set of experiences. But it's a great partnership that we're trying to build more of that here in New Mexico. Deal flow, sharing ideas, and bringing amazing founders here to build businesses.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that. Is he going to come to the studio?
He was there last week. Yeah.
Oh, I was. Okay, so I haven't had the opportunity to waste his time yet. Okay, Ward, brag, and it can't be that company.
You know, just listening to this talk today, it just reminds me what I love about my job. We just get to see some of the most incredible, far out, sometimes harebrained stuff. But hey, you know what? Maybe there's something there. You've heard about 8 or 9 or 10 very different technologies here. I'll talk about one that has really excited me about something solving a very local problem that could be globally scaled. There's a company called Carbogenics that is an Edinburgh, Scotland-based business that we were introduced to through another venture investor in New York City. And we got to talking to Ed Craig, the CEO, who has created this company that is in the biochar and biogas space. Biochar is not something very familiar to this country. It's much more prevalent outside of the United States. But it is a product that is a carbon sink. Think of charcoal. That's sort of stuff you cook your burgers on over the weekend. Biochar is kind of similar to that. It is a product of a process called pyrolysis that is a high heat process that burns but doesn't combust a product into biochar. In this case, Ed takes many different types of feedstock, but what we're excited about is the liability biomass, we call it, in northern New Mexico, which has resulted from wildfires. There is millions of acres of board feet of timber laying around, wasted, emitting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, just rotting away. Carbogenics can take that, run it through their pyrolysis process, and create a patented proprietary biochar called Crechar that, when added to an anaerobic digestion system to create biogas, will enhance the availability and productivity of that biogas by a factor of 20. So that's one piece of an ecosystem we're beginning to form in northern New Mexico, along with a company called Cambium. Can I talk about two?
Make it quick.
Cambium Carbon is a company based in DC that we have helped come out here. They are an operating system for sustainable lumber and timber. They sort of go find it, they do the logistics, they bring it to market. They also make a product called Carbon Smart Wood that's becoming very popular with very large off-takers like Amazon and Lowe's and companies like that. So we see an ecosystem developing around biomass that we're excited to get more companies into and make that sort of a selling point for New Mexico. Say, hey, if you want to do a biomass, come check out what we're doing here in New Mexico.
I love it. Okay, Donna, we went a little long, but that's an artifact of how excited my panelists were. Open it up to a few questions.
Yes.
Okay, recognizing that these guys will be around for a bit, so you can also corner them.
And while you do that, I want to just acknowledge Alina Kirku, who's here, Dean of Anderson School of Management. So that's all I wanted to say. So questions? I wonder how we want to do this. We don't have a runner mic.
Do you mind coming up? Just
Come
using
on
the mic?
Come on.
What do you see as the role of and path toward localizing supply chains to New Mexico specifically?
Localizing supply chain. Okay.
In the face of geopolitical turmoil and tariffs. Yeah.
And the question was the role of tech? Did you say the role of tech in commercializing?
Or maybe the role of us.
The role of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can take a swing at it as well.
Me too.
Do you have an idea?
I have an idea.
You go first.
Well, because I mentioned this earlier, I'm sort of obsessed with this topic right now. So we are trying to build a company in a space to help answer this question around supply chain risk. So I'm taking this from a security standpoint, not from a tariff standpoint, but now more than ever, products that are being used for government use cases, we're asking at such an in-depth level where those components are made, which is really challenging. Right now, it's even to the semiconductor level. This is part of why the CHIPS Act in the last administration was so important, is that we believe we need to start onshoring the capability to create even the most basic components of semiconductors, nanotechnologies. And so one of the things that I am very excited about is that I too believe that there are technologies that we need to be able to build here. And I too believe that we need the ability to create kind of secure enclaves where we have manufacturing capability that can service our most urgent, mission-critical use cases. So I'm excited because I'm both seeing more founders, maybe including yourself, hopefully someday, and I'm seeing more attention being brought into how can we use advanced manufacturing techniques to both create new components here, make it cost-effective, and also create new means of analyzing where components are from and understanding the tertiary supply risks. So there's a data play, there's a hardware play, and there's an advanced manufacturing play. Can we use robotics? Can we use other things to make it cost-effective to build here? So
I'll do just a very quick top off of that comment. I think that there's a precursor here, which is lab space. There's a kind of an odd shortage of places to build things, whether they're secure places like SCIFs or just labs, wet, dry labs to build things. And you wouldn't expect that to be an issue like the one Doug pointed to earlier about venture-ready entrepreneurs. We need more venture-ready entrepreneurs. We need more lab space to then build stuff that could potentially be built here and not in other places.
All right. Oh, we've got a whole line over here. All right. Okay. So.
Glad you brought up the lab space thing, because my question, you mentioned, I wanted to go back to Lano guy, B35 guy, 3D printer guy. So how was he able to convince you that he was able to cut down basically how to approve of all those parts, like they're good to go? Because I know there's, as somebody who is from the labs, and like if I come and say, okay, I see this process in the labs, this can be reduced 3-4 years or even by this much money. If I pitch it to you and I say, okay, let's say, okay, I'm an engineer, I have an engineer brain, not a business person. But I tell you, like, yeah. So I come to you and I say, I have the CFD model and this can cool re-entry vehicles significantly. However, I only validated it using like an open source software. And I could further validate it experimentally, but I need a lot of money to do that the labs already has. How can I get business people in a bar setting on a napkin get through to you all and say, hey, this will actually make a lot of money, this actually works, but I only have preliminary tests, preliminary data, and a very hodgepodge prototype. So if you can answer this by giving me like examples of like how he pitched it to you, how he proved it to you, that'd be great. And just the kind of prototypes that can really get someone to like pay attention and be like, oh, this is great. Because if you're limited in the kind of experiments that you need to do validate these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's a great question. What's your name?
Carolina.
Carolina. Okay,
Yes.
so Carolina, your story is why we created Roadrunner.
Okay.
Because I have found that the example that you're bringing up is exactly like the example of Dr. Luis Chavez, where there might be an engineer who has an insight about how something can be built differently, built more effectively, cut down on supply time, what have you. You've identified a problem, which engineers are very good at doing.
Right.
What we can do at Roadrunner, and what's unique about the studio, is we work with folks like yourself. You don't have to have it all figured out. What we're trying to build is we're going to inject that business acumen. We're going to bring advisors in. We're going to do that table napkin math with you. Now, to Ward's point, not all businesses are venture backable.
Yeah.
But we can help you think about, is this a market that's up for grabs? How big is that market? Is that problem universally felt, or is it just felt in small contexts in university lab settings? Like, we can help size it, and we can help you think about what the business model is. you asked me, what did Luis do? Well, Luis did a few things. One, he showed that his technology solved a specific use case in the lab, but also he was able to kind of extract the generalizable insight, which is a really important term for scientists, because oftentimes the problem that you're solving is specific to the research project.
Right.
And what we try to do is say, if we remove this from this specific research project, is this true in other settings? Could this solve other problems? And he helped us think about, hey, look, this is true for electrolyzers to create hydrogen, but as Ward knows, we now figured out that that core magic trick that he developed at Los Alamos could also be used to take methane and create low-cost methanol. So we look for avenues where you have a vision of the future, and it's tackling a problem that is generalizable enough that it is large enough to build a business around, and we can help equip you with building the business.
I see. Okay, kill 7 birds with 1 stone, basically. Okay, I guess like coming off as credible, like if it's just one off random scientist versus like maybe 4 PhDs that got together and said, hey, we actually looked at this and like this is actually pretty legit. Yeah.
Here's one thing that would really resonate with an investor in taking that pitch from you.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked to a couple of customers, and you have a general idea of what a customer pain point is that this would solve.
Okay.
And I think as Adam said earlier, I spent a lot of time at Lanel and a little less time at Sandia, but I'm doing a workshop next week to take a room full of bench scientists and talk about commercialization. What does that world look like? And from where I sit, it really starts with a customer need if you're going to commercialize something. So getting a little fluent around that would be, I think, credible.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't overemphasize what Ward just said, and I know I'm an engineer, I'm a technologist, I think in terms of technology, but if you want to get VC's attention, don't start with your tech. Start with the market pain that you're solving and how large that market is, and if a solution presented itself to that market pain, here's kind of the upside. If you sell me on that, okay, let's hear about your gadget.
Thank you.
All right, I wonder if we can take both questions, and that might allow us to efficiently answer them. So if you each can ask your questions, and then we'll throw it to the panel.
Excellent, sounds good.
Feedback.
All right. So if I'm working on a technology in the lab, how do I know it's actually at the point where I should start a company? Because if I know that there's a pain in the market and what I'm working on could actually solve that pain, usually from what I understand is when you start a tech company, the investments roll in and then you work in with a lot of people to actually get it to the point where it can solve the problem. But at the lab scale, it's still not there. How do I know when it's time to go for it?
Okay, that's one question. Second question. See what I'm doing?
Yeah,
Efficiency. I'm innovating in real time.
Thank you. How are you guys doing? Thank you. My name is Kingsley Nelson. I'm a junior in chemical engineering. Just a quick question. What's a piece of advice that you give your college self to be more successful as an entrepreneur?
Oh, that one's me.
Why don't you take the first
I guess
Don't
I could
forget
take
the
the
first
I guess I could take the first one. Man, think big. Think big. I mean, look at me. I got my degrees in civil engineering, and as I like to say, calling me a civil engineer is an insult to civil engineers. I got my degrees in civil engineering. It prepared me wonderfully for my career, but I ended up being an aerospace engineer, and it's because I started thinking big, and I started talking, and I started, my eyes were started to open about other career paths that were a lot more attractive. And again, a lot of the reason why we're here is because oftentimes here in New Mexico, because we have such a strong public sector, the best and the brightest, literally, that come out of this college, they typically end up going into the labs. And I get it. Those are great jobs, great benefits, great career. But there are other paths. And honestly, that's why I'm here, is so that the Doug Campbells of the future don't have to leave the state to go and be successful in their career. So again, what I would tell myself 20 some years ago is, man, think really, really big. really big, and just think out of the box, and anything's possible. Yep. Wow, I forgot the first question.
I'll take
Oh,
a quick stab at it. And
Yeah.
so I think it sounds like you have a scientific or engineering hypothesis in the lab that you validated. I think the next step is to go find a buyer or somebody with a problem that might solve and have them validate it in that context. To the point that, hey, if I could actually like touch and feel this thing and bring it into my business to solve a problem, I'd buy that. I think it's as simple as that. To validate, a science and a business hypothesis, develop those and go talk to people, right? And then you've got a little momentum and a story, and then you go find an investor or somebody in the tech transfer organization in whatever school or lab you're in.
And I think the key phrase to remember here is that the best businesses are built when the market risk has already been bought down. So what I mean by that is, if we get out of venture speak, it means that if you build it, they will buy it. I'll take the engineering risk on you, for you to build it. That's the risk I'll take. Hey, can he build it? But I'd much rather be in that situation than the opposite, which is I don't know if there's a buyer. So if you can go validate, to Ward's very good point, that there is a buyer for whatever you're wanting to build, that to me is a really strong indication that you should build a company.
But protecting your ideas is important. So there is this idea of like, A, is it novel? B, should you file, right? And disclose your idea in a patent, right? So that's an in-between step that I know y'all may or may not think about, but important for the inventor, right? So, yeah.
Awesome.
So,
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you all. Big round of applause.